The Incredible Toad of Toad Hall, Part 3.
Order! I will have order. Prisoner, pull yourself together and try and stand up straight. It's going to be 20 years for you this time. And mind, if you appear before us again, upon any charge whatever, we shall have to deal with you very seriously.
When Toad found himself immured in a dank and noisome dungeon, he knew that all the grim darkness of a medieval fortress lay between him and the outer world of sunshine and well-metalled high roads where he had lately been so happy, disporting himself as if he had brought up every road in England. He flung himself at full length on the floor and shed bitter tears and abandoned himself to dark despair.
This is the end of everything, or at least the end of the career of Toad, which is the same thing. The popular and handsome Toad, the rich and hospitable Toad, the Toad so free and careless and debonair. Oh, wise old badger, oh, clever, intelligent rat, and sensible mole. Oh, what sound judgments, what a knowledge of men and matters you possess. Oh, unhappy and forsaken Toad.
Now the jailer had a daughter, a pleasant wench and good-hearted, who assisted her father in the lighter duties of his post. She was particularly fond of animals, and his kind-hearted girl took pity on the misery of Toad. One morning she came into Toad's cell carrying a tray, with a cup of fragrant tea steaming on it, and a plate piled up with very hot buttered toast.
Tell me more about Toad Hall. It sounds beautiful.
Toad Hall is an eligible, self-contained gentleman's residence, very unique, dating in part from the 14th century, but replete with every modern convenience.
They had many interesting talks together after that, as the dreary days went on, and the jailer's daughter grew very sorry for Toad, and thought it was a great shame that a poor little animal should be locked up in prison for what seemed to her a very trivial offense. One morning the girl was very thoughtful and answered at random, and did not seem to Toad to be paying proper attention to his witty sayings and sparkling comments.
Toad, just listen, please. I have an aunt who is a washerwoman.
There, never you mind. Think no more about it. I have several aunts who ought to be washerwomen.
Do be quiet a minute, Toad. You talk too much, and you hurt my head. As I said, I have an aunt who's a washerwoman. She does the washing for all the prisoners in this castle. We try to keep any paying business of that sort in the family. You understand.
The good-natured girl explained to the ever-arrogant Toad her plan of having Toad bribing her aunt to allow him, the Incredible Toad of Toad Hall, to sneak off, posing as the old washerwoman. Toad reluctantly agreed. Next evening, the girl ushered her aunt into Toad's cell, bearing his week's washing pinned up in a towel. The old lady had been prepared beforehand for the interview, and the sight of certain gold sovereigns that Toad had thoughtfully placed on the table in full view practically completed the matter and left little further to discuss. With a quaking heart, but as firm a footstep as he could command, Toad set forth cautiously on what seemed to be a most harebrained and hazardous undertaking. It seemed hours before he crossed the last courtyard, but at last he heard the wicket gate in the great outer door click behind him, felt the fresh air of the outer world upon his anxious brow, and he knew that he was free. Dizzy with the easy success of his daring exploit, he walked quickly towards the lights of the town, not knowing in the least what he should do next, only quite certain of one thing, that he must remove himself as quickly as possible from the neighborhood where the lady he was forced to represent was so well known and so popular a character. Spotting the railway station, Toad made his way over to it accordingly, consulted a timetable, and found that a train, bound more or less in the direction of his home, was due to start in half an hour. His spirits rising rapidly, he went off to the booking office to buy his ticket. However, to his horror, he recollected that he had left both coat and waistcoat behind him in his cell. No waistcoat meant no pocket. No pocket meant no money to put inside. Baffled and full of despair, he wandered blindly down the platform where the train was standing, and tears trickled down each side of his nose.
This is the end for poor handsome Toad. Very soon my valiant escape will be discovered. The hunt will be up. I will be caught, reviled, loaded with chains, and dragged back again to the prison, and bread and water and straw. My guards and penalties will be doubled. And oh, the sarcastic remarks that jailer's daughter will make!
What was to be done? He was not swift of foot. His figure was unfortunately recognizable. Could he not squeeze under the seat of a carriage? He had seen this method adopted by schoolboys, when the journey money provided by thoughtful parents had been diverted to other and better ends. As he pondered, he found himself opposite the engine, which was being oiled, wiped, and generally caressed by its affectionate driver, a burly man with an oil can in one hand and a lump of cotton waste in the other.
No, sir, I'm a poor unhappy washerwoman, and I've lost all my money. I can't pay for a ticket, and I must get home tonight somehow. Whatever I'm to do, I don't know. Oh dear, oh dear.
The kindly engine driver agreed to give, who he presumed to be an old washerwoman, a lift in exchange for her to wash his dirty train-work shirts. The Toad's misery turned into rapture as he eagerly agreed to the engine driver's conditions and scrambled up into the cab of the engine. Of course, he had never washed a shirt in his life, and couldn't if he tried, and anyhow, he wasn't going to begin.
And when I get safely home to Toad Hall, and have money again, and pockets to put it in, I will send the engine driver enough to pay for quite a quantity of washing, and that will be the same thing, or better.
They had covered many and many a mile, and Toad was already considering what he would have for supper as soon as he got home, when he noticed that the engine driver, with a puzzled expression on his face, was leaning over the side of the engine and listening hard. Then he saw him climb onto the coals and gaze out over the top of the train. Then he turned to Toad.
It's very strange. We're the last train running this direction tonight. Yet I could have sworn that I heard another following us.
Toad ceased his frivolous antics at once. He became grave and depressed, and a dull pain in the lower part of his spine, communicating itself to his legs, made him want to sit down and try desperately not to think of all the possibilities.
I can see it clearly now. It's an engine on our rails, coming along at a great pace. It looks as if we're being pursued. Policemen and detectives, they're all waving and shouting the same thing. Stop, stop, stop.
The miserable Toad fell on his knees among the coals, and, raising his clasped paws in supplication,
Save me, oh, only save me, dear engine driver. Dear kind Mr. Engine Driver, and I will confess everything. I am not the simple washerwoman I seem to be, and I have no children waiting on me, innocent or otherwise. I am a Toad, the well-known and popular Toad, landed proprietor, and I have just escaped by my daring and cleverness from a lonesome dungeon into which my enemies had flung me. And if those fellows on that engine recapture me, it will be chains and bread and water and straw and misery once more for the poor unhappy innocent Toad.
Now tell the truth. What were you in prison for?
It was nothing much. I only borrowed a motor car while the owners were at lunch. They had no need of it at the time. I didn't mean to steal it, really. But people, especially magistrates, will take such harsh views of thoughtless and high-spirited actions.
But I fear that you have been indeed a wicked toad, and by right I ought to give you up to the offending justice. But you are evidently in sore trouble and distress, so I will not desert you. So cheer up, Toad. I'll do my best, and we may beat them yet. A short way ahead of us is a long tunnel. The other side of that line passes through a thick wood. Now mind, be ready to jump when I tell you. Ready! Jump!
Toad jumped, rolled down a short embankment, picked himself up unhurt, scrambled into the woods, and hid. Peeping out, he saw his train speed again and disappear at a great pace. Then out of the tunnel burst the pursuing engine, roaring and whistling, her motley crew waving their various weapons and shouting. When they were past, the toad had a hearty laugh, for the first time since he was thrown into prison. But soon he stopped laughing when he came to consider that it was now very late and dark and cold, and he was in an unknown wood with no money and no chance of supper, and still far from friends and home, and the dead silence of everything. He found the wood strange and unfriendly. At last, cold, hungry, and tired out, he sought the shelter of a hollow tree, where with the branches and dead leaves he made himself as comfortable a bed as he could, and slept soundly till the morning. The next day he awoke with the song of freedom in his heart. He had the world all to himself that early summer morning. The dewy woodland, as he treaded it, was solitary and still. The green fields that succeeded the trees were his own to do as he liked with. The road itself, when he reached it, in that loneliness that was everywhere, seemed like a stray dog to be looking anxiously for company. The reserved rustic road was presently joined by a shy little brother in the shape of a canal. Round a bend in the canal came plodding a solitary horse, stooping forward as if in anxious thought. From rope traces attached to his collar stretched a long line, taut but dipping with his stride. Toad let the horse pass, and stood waiting for what the fates were sending him. With a pleasant swirl of quiet water at its blunt bow, the barge slid up alongside of him. Its sole occupant, a big, stout woman wearing a linen sunbonnet, one brawny arm laid along the tiller.
A nice morning, washerwoman.
I dare say it is a nice morning to them who are not in sore trouble, like what I am. I've lost all my money and lost my way. I don't know what to do, ma'am.
Where might you be heading?
Near the river, close to a fine and glorious house called Toad Hall. That's somewhere hereabouts in these parts. Perhaps you've heard of it.
Toad Hall? Well, I'm going that way myself. This canal joins the river some miles further on, a little above Toad Hall, and then it's an easy walk. You come along in the barge with me and I'll give you a lift.
She steered the barge close to the bank, and Toad, with many humble and grateful acknowledgments, stepped lightly on board and sat down with great satisfaction.
Toad's luck again, and I always come out on top.
So you're in a washing business, ma'am. And a very good business you've got too, I dare say, if I'm not making too free in saying so.
Finest business in the whole country. I understand my work thoroughly and attend to it all myself. Ironing, washing, everything done under my own eye.
What a bit of luck meeting you. A regular piece of good fortune for both of us.
Why, what do you mean?
Well, look at me now. I like washing too. There's a heap of things of mine you'll find in the corner of the cabin.
It would be a right treat for you to wash them for me.
Toad was fairly cornered. He looked for escape this way and that, and saw that he was too far from the bank for a flying leap, and sullenly resigned himself to his fate. He supposed that any fool could wash. He fetched tub, soap, and other necessities from the cabin, selected a few garments at random, tried to recollect what he had seen in casual glances through laundry windows, and set to. A long half-hour passed, and every minute of it saw Toad getting crosser and crosser. Nothing that he could do to the things seemed to please them or do them good. Suddenly, a burst of laughter made him straighten himself and look round. The barge woman was leaning back and laughing unrestrainedly till the tears ran down her cheeks.
I've been watching you all the time. I thought you must be an humbug all along from the conceited way you talked. Pretty washerwoman you are. Never washed so much as a dishclout in your life, I'll lay.
Toad's temper, which had been simmering viciously for some time, now fairly boiled over, and he lost all control of himself.
How dare you talk to your betters like that? Washerwoman indeed! I would have you know that I am a toad, a very well-known, respected, distinguished toad. I may be under a little bit of a cloud at the present, but I will not be laughed at by a common, low, fat barge woman.
Why, so you are. Well, I never. A horrid, nasty, crawly toad, and in my nice, clean barge, too. Now, that is a thing I will not have.
She relinquished the tiller for a moment. One big, mottled arm shot out and caught Toad by a foreleg, while the other gripped him fast by a hind leg. Then Toad found himself flying through the air, revolving rapidly as he went, eventually reaching the water with a loud splash. He struck out for the shore, and when at length he touched land, he found it hard to climb up the steep bank unassisted. He had to take a minute or two's rest to recover his breath. Then, gathering his wet skirts well over his arms, he started to run after the barge as fast as his legs would carry him, wild with indignation, thirsting for revenge. The barge woman was still laughing and jeering at him when he drew up level with her. Toad never paused to reply. Solid revenge was what he wanted, not cheap, windy, verbal triumphs, though he had a thing or two in his mind that he would have liked to say. He saw what he wanted ahead of him. Running swiftly on, he overtook the horse, unfastened the tow rope and cast off, jumped lightly on the horse's back, and urged it to a gallop by kicking it vigorously in the sides. He steered for the open country, abandoning the towpath and swinging his steed down a rutty lane. Once he looked back, he saw that the barge had run aground on the other side of the canal, and the barge woman was gesticulating wildly and shouting.
No, come back here. You can't steal my horse. Get back here, you toad. Ow. Get back here.
The barge horse was not capable of any sustained effort, and its gallop soon subsided into a trot, and its trot into an easy walk. But Toad was quite contented with this, knowing that he, at any rate, was moving, and the barge was not. He had quite recovered his temper, now that he had done something he thought really clever, and he was satisfied to jog along quietly in the sun, steering his horse along byways and bridle paths, and trying to forget how very long it was since he had had a square meal, till the canal had been left very far behind him. He had travelled some miles. Selling the horse to a gypsy for a rather lucrative price, he proceeded to tramp along gaily. He thought of his adventures and escapes, and how, when things seemed at their worst, he had always managed to find a way out, and his pride and conceit began to swell within him. He got so puffed up with conceit that he made up a song as he walked in praise of himself, and sang it at the top of his voice, though there was no one to hear it but him. It was perhaps the most conceited song that any animal ever composed.
The world has held great heroes, as history books have showed, but never a name to go down in fame compared to that of Toad.
There was a great deal more of the same sort, but too dreadfully conceited to be written down. These are some of the milder verses. He sang as he walked, and he walked as he sang, and got more inflated every minute. But his pride was shortly to have a severe fall. After some miles of country lanes, he reached the high road, and as he turned into it and glanced along its white length, he saw approaching him a speck that turned into a dot, and then into a blob, and then into something very familiar, and a double note of warning, only too well known, fell on his delighted ear. It was the unmistakable sound of a motor car. He stepped confidently out into the road to hail the motor car, which came along at an easy pace, slowing down as it neared the lane, when suddenly he became very pale. His heart turned to water, his knees shook and yielded under him, and he doubled up and collapsed with the sickening pain in his interior. And well he might, the unhappy animal, for the approaching car was the very one he had stolen out of the yard of the Red Lion Hotel on that fatal day when all his troubles began. And the people in it were the very same people he had sat and watched at luncheon in the coffee room. He sank down in a shabby, miserable heap in the road, murmuring to himself in despair.
It's all up. It's all over now. Chains and policemen again. Prison again. Dry bread and water again. Oh, what a fool I've been. What did I want to go strutting around the country for? Singing conceited songs and hailing people in broad day in the high road instead of hiding till nightfall and slipping home quietly. Oh, hapless Toad! Oh, ill-fated animal!
The terrible motor car drew slowly nearer and nearer, till at last he heard it stop just short of him. Two gentlemen got out and walked round the trembling heap of crumpled misery lying in the road, and one of them said,
"Oh dear, this is very sad. Here's a poor old thing, a washerwoman apparently, who's fainted on the road. Here, let's lift her up into the car and take her to the nearest village, where she doubtless has some friends."
They tenderly lifted Toad into the motor car and propped him up with soft cushions and proceeded on their way. When Toad heard them talk in so kind and sympathetic a way, and he knew that he was not recognized, his courage began to revive, and he cautiously opened first one eye and then the other.
Look, she's doing better already. The fresh air is doing her good. How do you feel now, ma'am?
Thank you, kind sir. I'm feeling a great deal better, thank you.
That's right. There, keep quite still, and above all, don't try and talk.
I won't. I was only thinking if I might sit in the front seat there beside the driver, where I could get the fresh air full on my face. I could soon be all right again.
What a very sensible woman. But of course you shall.
Toad was almost himself again by now. He sat up, looked about him, and tried to beat down the tremors, the yearnings, the old cravings that rose up and beset him and took possession of him entirely.
It's fate. Why strive? Why struggle? Please, sir, I wish you would be so kind to let me drive the car for a little. I've been watching you carefully, and it looks so easy and so interesting that I should like to be able to tell my friends that I once had driven a motor car.
The driver laughed at the proposal so heartily that the gentleman inquired what the matter was. When he heard, he said to Toad's delight,
"Bravo, ma'am. I like your spirit. Give her a try and look after her. She won't do any harm."
Toad eagerly scrambled into the seat vacated by the driver, took the steering wheel in his hands, listened with affected humility to the instructions given him, and set the car in motion, but very slowly and carefully at first, for he was determined to be prudent. The gentlemen behind clapped their hands and applauded, and Toad heard them say,
How well she does it! Fancy a washerwoman driving a car as well as that, and the first time too.
Toad went a little faster, then faster still, and faster. He heard the gentleman call out warningly,
Mind yourself, washerwoman! Be careful, washerwoman!
and this annoyed him, and he began to lose his head. The driver tried to interfere, but he pinned him down in his seat with one elbow and put on full speed. The rush of air in his face, the hum of the engines, and the light jump of the car beneath him intoxicated his weak brain.
Washerwoman indeed! Ho ho! I am the Toad, the motor car snatcher, the prison breaker, the Toad who always escapes. Sit still and you shall know what real driving is, for you are in the hands of the famous and skillful, entirely fearless Toad.
With a cry of horror, the whole party rose and flung themselves on him.
Seize him! Seize the Toad! The wicked animal who stole a motor car! Bind him! Chain him! Drag him to the nearest police station! Down with the desperate and dangerous Toad!
Alas, they should have thought. They ought to have been more prudent. They should have remembered to stop the motor car somehow before playing any pranks of that sort. With a half turn of the wheel, the Toad sent the car crashing through the low hedge that ran along the roadside. One mighty bound, a violent shock, and the wheels of the car were churning up the thick mud of a horse pond. Toad found himself flying through the air with the strong upward rush and delicate curve of a swallow. Then, with a glorious splash, he landed head first into the river. He floated down the swift, flowing river for quite some time. Then slowly and with difficulty he drew himself up out of the water, till at last he was able to rest his elbows on the edge of the hole. There he remained for some minutes, puffing and panting, for he was quite exhausted. As he sighed and blew and stared before him into the dark hole, some bright small thing shone and twinkled in its depths, moving towards him. As it approached, a face grew up gradually around it, and it was a familiar face, brown and small, with whiskers, grave and round, with neat ears and silky hair. It was the water rat.